There are no rules in war. When the powers that be know they can get away with committing an atrocity, they generally will. But sometimes the press and journalists do their jobs and hold power to account for its sins, like bombing hospitals filled with innocent civilians and children. Just last year, the U.S. military was responsible for a bombing a Doctors Without Borders hospital in Kunduz, Afghanistan. The world reacted with outrage. Not enough, though, to prevent a similar incident, this time in Syria. Just yesterday, a children's hospital was bombed in Aleppo, Syria. While we don't have any confirmation on whether it was the United States, the Syrian government, or some other power that committed this act, the fact remains a jet deliberately targeted a building filled with innocent children. Doctors Without Borders has condemned the act. But is it enough? And is the Syrian crisis likely to spin out of control, even though we saw a ray of hope recently, with the bulk of Russian forces withdrawing and the United States looking like it was going to draw down its military pressure on the Assad regime? We'll discuss all of this and President Obama's new 250 boots on the ground in Syria is RT's international correspondent, Caleb Maupin. Welcome, Caleb.
Always a pleasure to have you on, Caleb.
Sure.
Always a pleasure. Ooh, 250 boots on the ground just dropped on us the other day, despite President Obama promising over and over again, no U.S. boots on the ground, no U.S. boots on the ground. And then, you know, Kirby over at the State Department saying, like, well, you just didn't quite understand what we meant by no boots on the ground. Doesn't really mean no boots.
Yeah, or ground.
But let's start with the hospital. Late last year, we covered the bombing of the hospital, the Doctors Without Borders hospital in Afghanistan. At this point, we don't know who bombed. As far as I know right now, we don't know who bombed the hospital. But why, let me ask you this, why are hospitals even remotely being targeted in the first place? I mean, why would, it doesn't make any sense to me. Well, from any side of this fight, in this conflict.
It really wouldn't make any sense for the Syrian government to bomb one of their own hospitals, especially because public health is probably one of the main points of pride that the Syrian government has taken in its accomplishments in the country. You know, since the 1970s, the life expectancy in Syria has increased by about 20 years. Infant mortality has been cut by about 80%. So it really wouldn't make sense. I mean, the World Health Organization has visited Syria as recently as 2009 and actually praised them for their accomplishments in public health. So it really wouldn't make sense for them to just attack a hospital like this.
It doesn't make any sense to me, or anybody for that matter, you know, unless it's a mistake, I hope.
Right.
You know.
All of this sort of comes at a time when Obama's been talking about this 250 new boots on the ground in Syria. My first question to you is, without the explicit permission of the Syrian government, is this action of sending 250 troops on the ground, is that technically legal by international law?
You can't send troops into someone else's country without permission. I mean, that's kind of the definition of an act of war. That's kind of, by definition, illegal. But for the last 5 years, the United States has been committed to this policy of overthrowing the Syrian government. The U.S. and its allies, Saudi Arabia, Turkey, and others have been trying to destabilize and overthrow the Syrian government. And now we're at the point where 300,000 Syrians at least are dead. Millions have become refugees. You know, there's a crisis. Billions of tax dollars have been spent. Now, you know, our fighting men and women are actually on the ground in Syria. A lot of people are asking themselves, is it worth it? Is this really what we should be doing? Is overthrowing the Syrian government really worth all that's been invested in it? I think a lot of people are asking themselves that question right now.
Is there an alternative? Because that seems to be, as you said, the U.S. government has been very vocal that it does not want Assad and that regime in power. Is there something else that could be done? Because it seems that all we ever hear is, well, our choices are we violently overthrow a government and send a country into chaos, or what? Isn't there something other? There's got to be other. This has happened before.
Well, any Syrian I've ever talked to has said that the country needs reform, that the political system needs to be updated, that there are problems in the country. But there's a lot of Syrians who are very adamant that kind of reform that they want is not going to come from ISIS. It's not going to come from al-Nusra Front, previously known as al-Qaeda in Syria. You know, that this violence, this terrorism is continuing, and the Turkish border remains open. So every day, weapons and supplies are crossing into the country. The country is becoming more destabilized. Saudi Arabia, Jordan, other countries continue to facilitate the flow of foreign fighters into Syria, and the country is becoming more and more destabilized, more and more chaotic. I mean, it's very frightening, and a lot of people are very concerned about it.
I can imagine.
So the context of the mainstream media, they're trying to portray this recent bombing, obviously, as an Assad/Syrian government initiative because there has been increased bombing from the Syrian regime against the rebels in Aleppo. What is the motivation behind this escalation of the bombings going on in Aleppo?
Well, I think at this point there's a real feeling, not just on the part of the Syrian government or other forces, but in the global community, that ISIS is a real danger. And as long as Syria remains destabilized, ISIS is going to be stronger. People all over the world are outraged by ISIS's crimes and want to see ISIS destroyed. At this point, though, there seems to be a realization on some people's part that overthrowing the Syrian government and defeating ISIS are two things that really don't click. You can't do both. You can't defeat ISIS and overthrow the Syrian government. That the Syrian government, Russia, and other countries, they have the ability to defeat ISIS. But further destabilization of Syria is only going to make ISIS stronger, as well as other groups that are trying to overthrow the Syrian government, like the al-Nusra Front, previously known as Al-Qaeda in Syria.
Yeah, it's interesting when you look at like all these different kind of chefs in the kitchen, going on in Syria right now. But let's look at just that government itself. Elections are scheduled and planned. They've had them even through all the chaos that's been going on there, which blows my mind. Americans can't even get their, U.S. citizens can't even get their election right in 2016, without major problems. Right. It shocks me that Syria's elections are coming off. But it's interesting because you keep seeing kind of this support for Assad election after election. Why do you believe that Syrian citizens still support the Assad government? I mean, we all know that he's not exactly the greatest guy in the world and the greatest leader in the world. Why is there still that support there?
Well, at this point, we have USAID reporting that about 74% of Syrians are participating in the elections. 80% of Syrians live in areas controlled by the government. And at this point, the Syrian population almost feels like it has a choice. They can support the internationally recognized Syrian government, or they can support a group of insurgents who have done a lot of awful, awful things. In Syria, you have Christians, you have Sunnis, you have Alawites living together in peace, you have a secular Arab republic. And the opposition are people that are committed to establishing a Wahhabi state, based on the interpretation of Islam found in Saudi Arabia. This kind of extremist thing that would lead to the slaughter of Christians, the slaughter of Alawites. Basically, this is a fight between stability and religious freedom against some very, very extreme forces. A lot of Western media has portrayed the Syrian, whatever you want to call them, rebels, insurgents, terrorists. They portrayed them as almost as if they were romantic freedom fighters and revolutionaries. And other forces that are on the ground say that's not really the case. These are people that are very violent, that kidnap people, that destroy hospitals, destroy schools, and have done some very, very extreme atrocities. We don't seem to be hearing much about that in the United States, though.
Yeah, I mean, it seems to me in a quagmire like that, you're going to have a million different kind of groups, a lot of different groups doing a lot of different things, so it's kind of hard to paint anything with the brush, that we see, that kind of, well, this side's bad, this side's bad.
When you always have people who take advantage of that for personal gain and in all of that chaos. My question to you is, we have a almost untenable situation that keeps going on. Is there a peaceful future for Syria in this entire? I mean, not only do you have a terrorist organization who's threatening them every day, you have, bordering countries who are hostile to you, and then you have, infighting within that. Is there a peaceful future somewhere in there for the Syrian people?
Well, what a lot of analysts have pointed out is that the source of destabilization, a lot of it is coming from outside of the country. Many of these fighters in al-Nusra and ISIS are not Syrians. They're, people from other countries throughout the region, even from places as far away as Malaysia. And that if countries in the region, namely U.S.-aligned Gulf states, Saudi Arabia, Kuwait, others, stopped funding and enabling foreign fighters to get into the country, the war would be over rather quickly. That this war has really become, an international effort to destabilize and overthrow the Syrian Arab Republic, and that if the forces in Syria were no longer having to face this international campaign, if they were simply fighting for control of their own country, the war would probably be over relatively quickly.
Interesting. That's very interesting.
Do you think that's possible? Do you think it's possible that if at some point we could sort of come to some kind of agreement, all of the countries, and everybody just kind of step back and let Syria heal and let the people heal and deal with this in an adult diplomatic way? Is that even remotely possible?
Well, I'm optimistic.
I think it's tough with ISIS kind of in there messing up the whole works. You know, I think if you didn't have the rise of ISIS, this might have been an entirely different kind of story, I'd imagine.
Well, I think that I would make the point that because the beginning of the war, actually, yes, there were grievances by the Syrians themselves, but ultimately there was this tremendous play of Western forces, Saudi money, that were actually working to destabilize the regime. So actually they brought foreign fighters in from the start. So I don't think it's just ISIS cropping up in 2014 after Assad starts to win the elections. That's
I'm talking
when
about now,
things
like
started
trying to find
stabilize.
stability there now. I think it's hard when you have this kind of other entity also sitting in there on the
I mean,
ground.
our own fighters are one side shooting at the other side who doesn't realize that they're on the same
Using the
side.
same-
Many of the Syrians who participated in the protests back in 2011 are now supporting the government. You know, they had grievances, they had frustration, but they don't support the campaign of violence and extremism now being directed at the government, you know. Syria was once one of the most stable countries in the region. People could walk down the street peacefully. You had different religious groups living together in peace, and that's clearly not the case
And
now.
that's what I've heard. I had
Interesting
my
as
cameraman,
always.
when I was in Japan, my cameramen were Syrian, and what I heard from them was a completely different sort of world.
Which is what we try to do every day on this show. And
It's a
thank
lot
you
of perspective.
so much getting that different perspective out there and trying to educate
you.
everybody for us. Caleb Maupin, RT International Correspondent, thank you.
Thank you.